Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I've been with Engine 4 in Trenton, New Jersey for 22 years. Mostly structure fires, car wrecks, a few chemical spills from the port, but nothing like what happened that week. People always say the worst shift is the one that starts normal. The sky was grey, humid and low, felt like a thunderstorm was waiting to roll in, but it never did. We were a 6-man crew that shift. I was the lieutenant, Martinez had the ladder, DeMarco was riding engine with me, Green and Thomas on rescue, and Rookie Jenkins on hose assist. Standard schedule, 24 on, 72 off. We were halfway through inventory when the first call came through. EMS request, possible code red, Pier 5, civilian attack, lacerations and bite trauma, dispatching fire and rescue with PD support. Bite trauma. That stood out. Usually we get that with dogs or drunks, but the tone in dispatcher's voice felt off. We rolled out in under 3 minutes. I took the wheel, DeMarco beside me, Rookie in back. The pier was 6 minutes out, near the industrial park on Lamberton Road. On the way we caught snippets from police band, units calling for backup, officers requesting containment. Something wasn't right. When we got there, it was chaos. 3 patrol cars had boxed off the loading area, lights still spinning. 2 officers were on the ground. One had his arm wrapped in gauze soaked dark red. The other didn't look like he was moving at all. EMS was late. A dock worker was sitting on the ground, his shirt torn open, blood around his mouth, not his own. He wasn't screaming, wasn't talking, just watching us. Quiet. Still. I stepped out, told Jenkins to stay in the rig, walked up with DeMarco and Green. The cop with the injury tried to explain, said the guy attacked his own supervisor after flipping out mid-shift, started biting people, wouldn't stop. One officer tried to subdue him, got bit. The second shot him in the leg. Didn't matter. The guy didn't go down. Before I could ask for clarification, the dock worker lunged. He moved like his joints weren't set right, arms loose but fast. He went for Green. We tackled him down, and it took 4 of us to hold him. The injured cop kept yelling, "Don't let him bite! Don't let him bite!" We restrained him using cable ties from the rescue rig. PD called for transport. EMS still hadn't arrived. Rookie Jenkins stayed in the cab, eyes wide, watching everything. That's when I noticed the officer on the ground, the one we assumed was dead, sitting up. He didn't groan, didn't call out, just sat up slowly, as if testing how his bones worked. Then he looked at us, eyes unfocused and glassy, and stood. He was missing half his neck, still stood. DeMarco froze. I shouted at him to back up. The cop lunged, faster than the dock worker. No hesitation, no humanity. Green pulled his fire hook and intercepted. Knocked him flat. He didn't stay down. The cop grabbed Green's ankle. We all jumped in, pulling Green free, but the damage was done. Deep scratches on his leg through the turnout pants. I radioed dispatch. "This isn't a normal scene. We need more units. Containment. Medical backup. Something is wrong." No answer. We heard only static and a voice trying to break through. Something about hold perimeter and quarantine measures in progress. The line cut out. We looked at each other. I made the call. Evac the area. Secure the station. We drove back faster than protocol allowed. Jenkins was pale. Green was sweating. DeMarco hadn't spoken. The silence in that cab was thicker than the sirens behind us. When we pulled into the station, the doors closed slower than I remembered. I told Jenkins to lock every external point. Thomas and Martinez were already on the radio trying to raise command, but there was no answer. By 0820, we realized something larger was happening. State channels were clogged, local repeaters dead. One of the old radios on the shelf caught part of an emergency broadcast. Reports of widespread violent incidents, mass confusion in urban centers, and CDC cooperation underway. It sounded like a test script, not a real update. Green collapsed in the bunk room. DeMarco and Thomas helped pull off his gear. The scratches on his leg had gone dark. Not black, not yet, but the swelling was unnatural, hot to the touch. Martinez started a makeshift isolation in the upstairs gear wash. Nothing fancy, just plastic sheets and duct tape. It was all we had. We sealed Green in. He wasn't lucid, kept muttering about the dock worker. Didn't blink once. Jenkins asked if this was a virus. I told him I didn't know. But the way the injured officer got back up, that's not viral. That's something else. I've seen corpses, fires, death. None of them ever got back up with half a throat missing. At 0900, we heard banging on the side doors, fast, frantic, deliberate. Someone outside. We peeked through the maintenance camera. A woman in blood-soaked scrubs, medical badge from St. Francis Medical Center. She was alone. We debated letting her in, against protocol, but this wasn't protocol anymore. I gave the order. We opened the west side access. She stumbled in and locked the doors behind her. First thing she said was, "They got inside the ER. Everyone's dead. Don't go near the hospital." Her name was Lisa Cho, nurse. She'd been off shift when it started, came in early for a double and walked into a massacre, said some of the patients weren't restrained right. A man from an earlier incident stood up mid-surgery, killed the entire OR team. The bodies got back up. She ran before they sealed the ambulance bay, said the city was already full of infected by the time she got out. Lisa stayed with Jenkins in the kitchen, shaking, sipping water like she hadn't seen any in hours. I checked on Green. He was worse. Skin cold, eyes unfocused. He didn't recognize me, just kept whispering about the sirens. Then he stopped breathing. I called for DeMarco and Thomas. We began CPR. No pulse, no reaction. We stopped at 20 minutes. Time of death, 10:37. We zipped him in one of the old canvas body bags from the hazmat locker. I didn't know what else to do, but we didn't bury him. Not after what we saw on the pier. Martinez wanted to take him outside, just in case, but it was Jenkins who asked the right question. What if he wakes up? We waited. 1 hour, 2, nothing. At 12:21, the body bag moved. It wasn't much, just a twitch. Then a groan, deep and low, more like something stuck in the throat than an actual voice. Martinez froze. DeMarco backed away. Thomas stood by the fire axe locker. I gave the order. We dragged the bag to the garage floor, surrounded it. Thomas unzipped it halfway. What came out wasn't green anymore. The thing looked up at us, jaw slack, teeth bared. Not in anger, in instinct. Like it didn't know anything else. It reached for Martinez. Thomas swung once. Clean. That was the first time we had to do it. It would not be the last. We sealed the body in a locker behind the turnout gear. Reinforced the latch with hose clamps and a pipe bar. By nightfall, the city was on fire. Distant plumes. We heard more sirens than I ever had in my life, and then none at all. One by one, the emergency bands fell silent, then the music stations, then static. Lisa said she saw the state police try to seal Route 29, saw them get overrun. She kept saying, this wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either, like they're patient, like they wait. Lisa's words stayed with me through the night. I didn't know how to process them, not yet, but I kept replaying what she said, that they weren't charging or clawing in some wild frenzy. They watched, waited. That's not supposed to be how the dead move. We've all seen the same footage, read the same pulp. Zombies drag their feet, groan, rush you mindlessly. These didn't. They studied. Like something half alive still sat behind the eyes, just enough to make them dangerous in a way we hadn't prepared for. I stepped out into the apparatus bay just after 0300 hours. The quiet was wrong. Normally you'd hear distant traffic or the occasional freight train cutting across the edge of the city, but Trenton was silent. You couldn't even hear dogs. Even the hum of the power grid felt faded. I checked the exterior locks, one by one. Our fire station was built in the 80s, concrete with steel-reinforced doors and roll-up bays, originally part of the city's Cold War civil defense infrastructure. Never mattered before. Now it felt like a bunker, barely enough. Martinez was asleep in the recliner with his radio still on his chest. Static mostly, with the rare blip of broken code. Jenkins was supposed to relieve him at 0100, but the kid was curled up on the kitchen floor beside a mop handle and a half-eaten granola bar. I let them both sleep. We needed bodies that could function tomorrow, and Jenkins hadn't stopped shaking since we got back. I made my rounds again. Fuel reserves were at 70%, generator on standby, water tanks topped off, but if the mains failed, that wouldn't last. I inventoried the food, MREs from the urban response kits, canned supplies, dry goods from the crew fridge. Maybe 5 days if we stretched it, less if someone panicked and started hoarding. I moved most of it to the old utility closet behind the SCBA locker, locked it, and only told DeMarco. By dawn, Lisa was in the corner of the day room sketching something with a half-charred pencil stub and a roll of thermal receipt paper. She'd been trying to trace where the outbreak started. Said she'd heard whispers it wasn't just here. Newark, Camden, even parts of Philly were dark. She drew arrows, hospital names, CDC field offices. "Something's wrong," she kept saying. "The response time, the communications blackout. It's like they knew, or like they weren't ready at all." We were barely holding it together, but I had to act like we were. I called a morning briefing at 0700 hours. Jenkins, DeMarco, Martinez, Thomas, Lisa. We circled up in the bay. Everyone was armed, fire axes, pry bars, even a salvaged Halligan tool. I made it clear, this wasn't a temporary lockdown anymore. The city had fallen, or at least gone silent. If there were any survivors still listening to emergency broadcasts, they weren't on the same grid as us. Thomas brought up the idea of broadcasting, said maybe we could rig a signal booster, use the old ham unit the retirees had kept in the attic. I remembered it. Some old-timer used to tinker with it between shifts. We found it under a tarp, dusty but intact. Frequency range was limited, but we had a basic antenna mount above the hose tower. Took us the better part of the day, but by 1500 hours we had a test signal running. The first message was simple. "This is Trenton Fire Station 4. Survivors inside, holding perimeter, medical assistance needed. Any military or emergency response, acknowledge." We set it on a loop, 1-minute intervals, low wattage. If someone was listening nearby, they'd hear it. Lisa didn't speak much after that, just sat on the upper landing and watched the main garage door. It was like she was waiting for something she couldn't explain. Not fear, exactly. More like dread. The kind that comes when you realize the cavalry might not be coming. That night we saw the first group. Martinez was checking the east window, a reinforced poly panel that looked out towards South Broad Street. He spotted movement. 6 figures, walking slowly, heads tilted forward, arms loose at the sides. No shouting, no moaning, just the quiet shuffle of something not living, not fully. They moved past the front of the station, stopped halfway down the block, and just stood there. We killed the lights. Nobody moved. Lisa crouched beside the bay door and whispered, "That's what I meant. They're waiting." I watched them from the tower, through the old binocular scope we used for smoke spotting. Their clothes were torn, hospital scrubs, jeans, security uniforms. One still wore a Port Authority badge, half peeled from his shirt. Their mouths hung open slightly, lips darkened. Hands twitched now and then. One looked up at the building slowly, without urgency, and then they walked away. No attack, no siege, just observation. It felt worse than if they'd charged. Martinez asked if we should follow them. I said no, not yet. We needed more information. If they were just infected and confused, maybe they'd decay, burn out. But I knew better. Everyone did. The next day, Thomas and I ventured out in the early morning. Light was low, cloud cover thick. We took the rescue truck, not the engine, too loud, and drove 10 blocks west to the main supply center, an old training facility turned depot. The streets were empty, cars left mid-turn, buses stalled sideways. A grocery storefront had been torn apart, but there were no bodies, just streaks, drag marks. The depot was half open. We scouted it carefully. Inside we found crates of emergency rations, sealed medical kits, and a stash of N95 masks in a rusted locker. More importantly, 2 5-gallon drums of fuel and a set of bolt cutters. We packed everything we could carry and left a mark on the exterior door. Standard search and rescue X with date and time, just in case others came through later. Old habits. Back at the station, DeMarco had fortified the garage doors with cut steel rods from the scrap bin. Jenkins was tasked with making inventory lists. It gave him something to do besides spiraling. I found Lisa scanning the frequencies again, flipping through static like it was rosary prayer. That night, more of them came. This time there were 10, maybe more in the shadows. They didn't approach the station directly, just milled around. We stayed dark, silent. I made the call to rotate watches every 2 hours. Nobody slept deeply. Even Jenkins kept his hand near the flare gun tucked under his coat. At 0400 hours, the radio crackled. A voice, clear, female, broken by static. "Trenton, if anyone, hold fast. Help is compromised. Infected in command." Then silence. We tried to trace the signal. No luck. Could have been 20 blocks. Could have been 200 miles. But it confirmed what we feared. This wasn't isolated. It wasn't even regional. And if it had reached command, there were no orders coming. No cavalry. Just whatever you could build and hold yourself. On the morning of day 4, Thomas didn't show up for his watch. We found him in the hose tower, staring out through a broken slit in the metal. He hadn't slept, barely blinked. Said he'd seen one of the infected stop and place its hand against the glass. Not bang, not claw, just press its hand there, like it was feeling the structure, like it was thinking. He looked at me and said, "They know we're still in here." I didn't argue, couldn't. The logic of it made too much sense. These things weren't mindless. They were slow, yes, but deliberate. Like a collective hive testing weaknesses, and our walls, concrete and steel as they were starting to feel paper thin. The days that followed were measured not in hours or meals, but in movements. How many passed by the street, how long they lingered, how many pressed closer. We tracked them in silence, jotting notes on the old duty whiteboard. By the 6th day, the number of infected near our station had doubled. They didn't attack. They paced. Sometimes they'd disappear for hours, then return from new directions, as if circling the building with some strategy. Jenkins called it the drift, like a tide pattern, always back. We started marking their arrival times and the number of steps they took before stopping. It was something to do, but even our observations felt like we were trying to analyze ghosts. They weren't following heat or light or noise. They were following memory, paths they'd taken when they were alive, streets they walked, buildings they entered. One day we watched a mailman shuffle to the corner and try to put something into a ruined drop box. His fingers were nearly bone. He didn't stop, just kept reaching. The tension inside the station was just as dangerous. Thomas had become unpredictable. He was still sharp, still capable, but his behavior shifted. Paranoid, restless. He questioned everything I said, double-checked every supply log, and started hiding equipment just in case. I confronted him after he hoarded a box of field dressings under his bunk. He claimed it was for emergencies, real ones, not scratches and panic. Lisa stepped in before it escalated. She wasn't crew, but everyone respected her by then. She had a calm that didn't come from denial, but acceptance, like she'd already seen the worst and made peace with it. That scared me more than Thomas's outbursts. Our next supply run was necessary and dangerous. The rations were down to 3 days. Water was still flowing, but the pressure had dropped, likely from city power losses. Martinez and I took the rescue truck again. This time we aimed farther, northwest to the small warehouse district near Calhoun Street, where we hoped some FEMA supplies might have been staged. The drive was slow, no sirens, no radio, just idle throttle and turns taken wide in case something was hiding in alleys. The streets were almost completely abandoned now. What few vehicles hadn't been crashed or burned out were deserted, doors open, trunks empty, signs of struggle, but no bodies, no sound. We reached a former Red Cross distribution node near an elementary school. The gates were open, no signs of military presence. I parked behind a damaged patrol SUV while Martinez swept the front with a crowbar and light. We found boxes, sealed, stacked, ready, a miracle. But there was a smell. Rot, damp metal, and dried blood. Martinez opened the side office and froze. There were 3 people inside, all dead, not infected, dead. Gunshots to the head, a woman and 2 men. One wore a responder vest, the other 2 could have been looters or desperate locals. There was no sign of a struggle. The door had been locked from the inside. They chose to die that way. I stepped back into the corridor and said nothing. We loaded what we could carry, 3 packs of rations, medical kits, bottled water, a dozen cans of fuel stabilizer, and a full field trauma bag. As we closed the truck doors, I spotted a group of infected 3 blocks out, moving slowly toward the school. They didn't seem to hear us yet, but we didn't linger. We rolled out quietly, engine low. Back at the station, Thomas was waiting at the door, axe in hand. I asked him if anything happened. He said no, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Inside, DeMarco pulled me aside. Jenkins had found one of the fuel cans missing from the secured closet. We only kept 5, now there were 4. I checked the usage log, something we'd kept religiously since day 1. No entry. I asked around. Everyone denied taking it, except Thomas wasn't around to ask. We found him on the 2nd floor, sitting near the hose tower again. The missing can was beside him, open, half drained into the vent duct. When I asked why, he looked through me and said, "If they get in, we can't let them take us. Not like the hospital, not like the pier." It wasn't anger, it was certainty. He wanted an escape plan, one final switch to flip. Lisa stepped forward, asked him to hand it over. He didn't resist, just nodded, as if someone had finally acknowledged his thoughts were rational. We secured the fuel, locked the duct system, moved the remaining cans to the bay ceiling in a hanging harness, reachable but not usable without a ladder. That night, we doubled the watches. At 0200 hours, the infected returned in force. This time, they didn't just circle, they approached, 18 of them, slow, silent, some dragging one leg, others missing arms or half their jaws. But they came directly to the south bay door. One pressed its face against the steel and held it there, just breathing, not banging, not moaning. Another placed its hand on the sensor light, set it off, and didn't flinch at the brightness. Martinez whispered that we needed to act. DeMarco agreed. Lisa urged restraint. "They're testing us," she said. "Let them." But then one of them crouched, not fell, crouched, and began prying at the lower panel seam with its fingers. Metal groaned. Not much, but enough. We activated the external floodlights. A bluff. It worked. The infected paused. All of them. Like a switch was thrown. Some turned their heads. Others looked skyward as if confused. Then, movement behind them. A figure walked calmly down the street, not infected. A man in a tan coat, limping, dragging something. He stopped at the edge of the group, raised his free arm and shouted a single word, something I couldn't make out. The infected turned and followed him. We watched from the tower until they disappeared around the block. No one spoke for almost 5 minutes. I don't know if that man was alive or dead. I don't know if he was leading them away or summoning them, but what I do know is that he had control, or they allowed him to appear as though he did. Either possibility was worse than anything I'd considered. The following day was quiet. We used it to fortify, welded additional bars to the inner door tracks, created fallback zones inside the station, kill boxes, staged equipment caches in the rafters, built ladder escape routes to the rooftop. Lisa suggested creating a code system for emergencies, 2 knocks for movement outside, 3 for breach, 4 for evacuation. We agreed. I asked her where she'd learned that. She just said, "Nursing school taught a lot more than bandaging." On day 9, Jenkins cracked. It started small, repeating the same inventory counts out loud, pacing the perimeter with his gear still on, taking post hours before his watch. Then he started talking to someone who wasn't there. Said he heard the captain giving orders over the intercom. There was no captain, not anymore. He collapsed in the engine bay near sundown, shaking and silent. DeMarco and I moved him to the bunk room, locked the door, and posted watch. Lisa stayed with him for hours, whispering, soothing. We kept Jenkins in the bunk room for the next 36 hours. He didn't eat, didn't speak, just stared at the ceiling and occasionally whispered things none of us understood, muttered fragments of old shift drills and fire codes, intercut with what sounded like radio call signs. Lisa said it was a form of psychological regression. His brain was pulling memories from before the outbreak, trying to drown out everything else. I'd seen burn victims do similar things, go inward, find one safe memory and lock onto it like a raft. We rotated watches by the door, always armed, just in case. But Jenkins never turned violent, never showed any of the signs we'd seen on Green. There was no fever, no discoloration, just quiet, bone-deep withdrawal. On the morning of the 10th day, I opened the door and found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, calmly folding his turnout coat. He didn't look up when I entered, just said, "We're not firefighters anymore, Lieutenant. Not really." I didn't argue. I sat down next to him, helped fold the gear. The weight of that moment settled hard in my chest. He wasn't wrong. Firefighters run toward danger. But what happens when danger isn't a fire or a collapse? What happens when the entire system we're trained to trust, dispatch, hospitals, chain of command, goes silent? That day, Lisa managed to re-establish contact with a shortwave repeater. It wasn't local. Signal modulation suggested southern Pennsylvania. A male voice, heavily filtered by static, read from what sounded like a prepared script. "This is Station Romeo 9er. Civilian group broadcasting from Ridgeview Fire Academy. We have survivors, supplies limited. No active infection inside perimeter. Do not bring wounded. Repeat. Do not bring wounded. Confirm your position and intent." We scrambled to respond. Martinez handled the call-out, transmitting our ID, location, and condition. The response came nearly a full minute later. "Trenton, 4, confirm visual presence. Infected spotted near state lines. Movement from capital sectors approaching. Suggest prepare for total breach within 72 hours. Recommend abandon city if mobile. Ridgeview cannot send extraction." The signal cut. We replayed the message 3 times to be sure. Ridgeview was at least 40 miles west. Doable, but not without risk. If we left, we'd need a full day of prep, fuel, and a working route. No guarantees. And the phrase total breach stuck with me. If they had eyes near the capital sectors, that meant this thing had swept across the state. There wasn't going to be a federal response. There wasn't going to be any planes overhead or soldiers pulling up in convoy. Thomas, who had barely spoken in 2 days, stood and said, "We're not surviving this here. You know that, right? This building wasn't made for siege. It was made for response. We've got maybe a few more days before they stop watching and start breaking in." Martinez argued we had the advantage. Walls, tools, elevation. I agreed in part. But the signs were mounting. Fuel had dropped to 1/3 of capacity. The infected had begun to press against the building at night, no longer just watching, but brushing the bay doors and testing the windows. We had begun hearing sounds in the pipes, echoes of movement in the sewer lines below. That terrified me more than anything. If they could learn, if they could use infrastructure. On day 12, the firehouse was breached. It happened during the morning rotation. Martinez was on upper watch. Jenkins was downstairs replacing the Halligan mount in the tool locker. Lisa and I were reviewing supplies. Thomas and DeMarco were checking the radio loop. It should have been routine, quiet. But we missed something. The east side service hatch, rarely used, rarely checked, had a failing hinge. We'd meant to reinforce it, but hadn't gotten to it yet. I heard the noise first, a clatter, low metal impact, then a scraping, not fast, not panicked, deliberate. When I stepped into the hallway, the hatch was wide open, and the light streaming in from the alley was broken by 3 distinct silhouettes. I shouted for backup. Jenkins turned, screamed, and threw the nearest object, a wrench, into the dark. It struck one of them in the shoulder. No reaction. The lead figure entered slowly. It was an older man in a sanitation worker's uniform, flesh sagging at the cheeks, neck covered in bite marks. His mouth hung open like a broken vent. Behind him, 2 others followed. A woman in a business skirt with bare feet and torn wrists, and a teenage boy with half his scalp missing, dragging one leg. We formed a defensive wedge. Thomas and I up front, Lisa and Jenkins behind. DeMarco charged from the opposite hall and swung a splitting maul through the first one's neck. It didn't decapitate, but it stopped movement. I took the woman, drove the Halligan spike into her temple and pinned her to the floor. Jenkins froze when the boy lunged, but Lisa shoved him aside and jabbed a pry bar upward, bracing with her knee. It took both of them to keep him down. We secured the breach, but it was a wake-up call. They weren't testing anymore. They were entering. Later, when we reviewed the hatch from the outside, we saw scrape marks along the hinge and blood smears near the lock, signs that they'd tried it multiple times before. Only today had it finally given out. We slept in shifts that night, each of us armed. No one was allowed more than 90 minutes down at a time. Lisa set up a tripwire rig with fire line and a bell from the turnout room. Martinez repurposed the station's thermal camera into a hallway sensor. Every corridor was shadowed with emergency lights and crowbars laid within arm's reach. That night, Jenkins asked me if I remembered the Liberty Street fire, the one in 09 when the row homes went up from a busted boiler. I nodded. He said he remembered watching me pull a woman from the second floor with the fire lapping the eaves. I thought you were a ghost after that. Just walked out of the smoke like it didn't matter. I told him I wasn't a ghost then. I was a firefighter. But you're a ghost now, he said. We all are. We just don't know it yet. I didn't reply. just stood there and listened to the metal groan of the bay doors in the wind. By the 13th day, we had only one choice left: evacuate or die slowly. Ridgeview was still broadcasting. Brief check-ins, most of them automated but consistent. That meant infrastructure, fuel, power, a chance. I gathered the crew. We leave at 0600 tomorrow. Route 31 north to Route 202. We skip the interstates. Too exposed. We take both engines. One lead, one supply. Strip anything non-essential. Lisa, prep the med kits. DeMarco, check fuel cells. Martinez, I want the chains reinforced across the rear roll-up. Thomas, you'll drive. Nobody argued. We knew what staying meant. That night, we burned the uniforms of those we'd lost, Green and the others who hadn't made it back from runs. A quiet, ritual flame behind the building in an old steel barrel we once used for practice drills. Lisa recited something soft. Martinez hummed the end of a song I didn't recognize. Jenkins sat silent, hands folded. And then the siren blared. Not ours, a city unit, faint, far off, but real. We rushed to the tower. Through the binoculars, I saw it. An engine from Station 8, full lights, crawling through the intersection near the courthouse. It was dragging something, maybe metal fencing, maybe barricade slats, but it moved slow and crooked. We signaled with the spotlight, no response. DeMarco ran to the rooftop antenna and tried broadcasting direct, still nothing. Then the lights on the engine blinked off, and from behind it, a horde poured out, dozens of infected spilling from side streets and service doors. They hadn't attacked the truck, they'd followed it, used it, like bait. We watched from the upper level as the swarm consumed the street like floodwater, slow, relentless, gliding around corners and seeping into every exposed edge. They didn't chase the truck. They didn't need to. They simply surrounded it, stretching outward like they knew someone might still be watching, waiting for a response. The way they moved wasn't chaotic. It was methodical, calculated, a perimeter, not a frenzy. They weren't there for the truck. They were there to trap us. For nearly 30 minutes, the engine lights flickered weakly, then went dead. I counted 47 infected, visible under the street lamps and moonlight, but there were more in the shadows. We'd seen this before, the way they moved in layers. The ones you see are only the bait. The others wait until you make a decision. Jenkins stood by the doorframe, clutching the old flare gun like it was the last weapon on Earth. Lisa sat behind the radio panel, staring at the screen like it owed her a different ending. Thomas leaned against the gear lockers with a fire axe in one hand, duct tape wrapped around the grip like he'd prepped it for war. We were ready, but it wasn't going to be enough if they got in again. "We don't respond," I said. "We don't approach that engine. It's a trap." No one argued this time. The silence had matured. It wasn't shock anymore, it was resignation. Every one of us had come to understand that this wasn't about helping anymore. It was about not getting killed, helping someone already dead. We blacked out the windows and dropped the thermal curtains over the tower. The horde lingered for nearly an hour, drifting closer to the mouth of our street, but never stepping foot into the station lot. I wondered if they still had some imprint of what this building was. Firehouse, emergency hub, a place where people once ran to. Maybe that's why they circled instead of charging, like they were remembering something they no longer understood. At 0300 hours, they dispersed. Not in a panic, not like prey fleeing. They just turned and walked away. Some alone, others in twos or threes, peeling off down alleyways and into the dark. By 0400, only the silence remained. The truck was still there, empty, lights off. The trail it left, a broken lattice of scrape marks and torn barricade, was a dead road. We never saw who drove it. We made final preparations by first light. The evacuation plan was straightforward, but tight. Engine 4 would take the lead with Lisa, Jenkins, and Martinez. Engine 6, the reserve pumper, would trail with Thomas and DeMarco, hauling fuel, medical supplies, and the spare generator unit. I'd ride between both, transferring as needed and keeping visual contact. We knew better than to use main streets. We mapped a route using service roads, alleys, and fire lanes, places we knew by heart after decades of false alarms and late-night calls. The final stop would be the open field north of Lambertville, just off Goat Hill Road, where a state forestry station once trained wildfire units. Ridgeview had marked it on their last known grid as a green zone, clear, as of a week ago. We couldn't confirm it now, but it was the closest thing we had to hope. Departure was set for 0600 hours. We used the last hour to say goodbye to the station. There was no ceremony, no pictures, no flag folding. We'd already burned our dead. What remained was muscle memory. I walked the halls one final time, checked the gear room where Green's nameplate still hung beside his unused helmet. Stepped into the kitchen where Martinez once grilled burgers after a 2-alarm fire. Touched the wall beside the bunk room where the paint still bore the dents from Jenkins's first accidental Halligan throw. Each corner of that building held stories. Each corner reminded me that none of it mattered now. At 0545, we suited up. DeMarco cut the padlock off the rear gate and Thomas eased the backup engine into the alley. I walked the perimeter with Lisa, checking for movement. Nothing. Not yet, but that didn't mean much. We'd learned that the worst silence is the one that watches. Martinez took point in engine 4, a shotgun on the dashboard and a folding shovel at his side. Jenkins sat beside him, hand on the siren control, disconnected but comforting. Lisa rode in back, guarding the medkits. I jumped into the side seat of engine 6 and gave the go. We pulled out slow, no lights, no engine roar, just the low groan of wheels over broken concrete. South Broad was clear. The truck we'd seen last night was gone, dragged off, stripped or swallowed. Debris littered the avenue, shopping carts, office chairs, even a mailbox that had somehow ended up on its side in the middle of the intersection. Signs of struggle were everywhere, but still no bodies. The infected didn't leave bodies, only blood, drag trails, silence. By mile 3, we passed the city library, where emergency tents once stood. Now only collapsed frames and ash remained. The fire hadn't taken everything. Some of the banners were still readable. Checkpoint Charlie, stenciled on faded canvas. I remembered when we helped set that up, first week of the outbreak, just fever cases back then. Still hope in our voices, still orders being given. We didn't stop. A detour through the old trolley line took us behind the college district. Campus buildings stood like silent witnesses, windows busted, doors chained shut. We saw no infected, but we never let our guard down. Thomas rode one hand on the wheel, the other on a machete duct-taped to a pipe wrench. At every stop sign, we hesitated only long enough to confirm line of sight. Every second mattered now. As we passed into the outskirts, we saw movement ahead, 6 figures standing near a drainage channel beneath the highway overpass. We halted, engines off, watched. They didn't react. Martinez stepped out of engine 4 and raised a crowbar in one hand, low and non-threatening. The figures turned slowly. 4 were infected. Obvious. Discoloration, slack limbs, dead posture. But 2 weren't. A man and a young girl, breathing, alert, holding hands. The girl pointed at our trucks and stepped forward. I stepped out, raised both hands. The man yelled something, muffled. Then he screamed, "Help us!" The infected didn't attack them, didn't restrain them either. They just stood between us like guardians. Lisa stepped out beside me. "They're using them," she said. "They're bait, or leverage." I shouted for the man to run, to cut left. He hesitated, looked at the girl, then nodded. They bolted toward the embankment. The infected turned as one. I shouted, "Cover fire!" Martinez fired a flare round into the concrete near their feet. It flashed bright, blinding. The infected twitched, startled but not afraid. Thomas revved engine 6 forward, bumper first, smashing one of the infected off its stance and scattering the others. Lisa and I grabbed the girl as she hit the grass. The man tripped but scrambled to his feet, clutching a torn duffel. We pulled them both into engine 4 and accelerated hard. No questions, no explanations, just escape. The rest of the route passed in silence. We reached the old forestry outpost by mid-afternoon. It was mostly intact, an open yard with rusted towers and a maintenance shed half covered in ivy, but no sign of Ridgeview, no guards, no vehicles, no lights. DeMarco secured the perimeter while Lisa checked the man and girl. Their names were Eric and Nora, father and daughter. They'd been part of a convoy headed toward Harrisburg. It broke down 3 days ago. Only 4 people made it out of the crash. Now only 2 remained. They slept under a salvaged tarp that night. Eric curled protectively around Nora like he expected the trees themselves to lurch up and devour them. I don't blame him. We posted guards in rotating shifts, but there was no real sense of security. No matter how quiet it got, no matter how still the forest seemed around the clearing, we knew what was out there. They didn't always make noise, they didn't always knock. Sometimes they waited behind the wind. The outpost wasn't built to last. It had been a training camp once, wildland suppression, airdrop drills, comms. But after the state budget gutted its funding, the Forestry Service left it to rot. We found rusted hoses, degraded bunker gear, and a backup generator that stank of old diesel. Still, it was something. A perimeter, a building, a water source in the form of a shallow reservoir just beyond the tree line. Better than open roads and shadows. DeMarco rigged a motion sensor grid using tripwires and old parking lot chimes we pulled from the shed. Thomas and I rewired the generator enough to get floodlights working on half the perimeter. Lisa inventoried what little medical gear remained, her hands shaking slightly for the first time since I'd known her. Even Jenkins came around, quiet but functional. Something about Nora brought him back to the surface. Maybe seeing a child still breathing reminded him that not everything had been lost. At dawn I walked the outer ring. Trees rose thick around us, but the undergrowth had been cleared years ago by the fire crews who once trained here. You could see 100 feet in every direction, long enough to count figures, long enough to prepare. A small red fox darted across the clearing and vanished into a drainage culvert. For a split second, I envied it, free, silent, without knowledge of how far the world had fallen. Back at camp, we made decisions. Ridgeview was silent. No sign, no signal, not even a trail. Maybe they'd moved. Maybe they'd fallen. It didn't matter. This spot, crude as it was, had become our new station. We called it Post Echo. We set routines. Day watch started at 0700 hours, patrols in pairs. One engine remained mobile at all times, fueled and packed. Every evening we took inventory, marked movement, mapped the tree line for disturbances. We buried the dead fuel cells out near the east slope. No point wasting the last of them. The real threat was time, not distance. If we stayed too long, we'd be noticed. But that didn't happen right away. For a short stretch, 3 days, maybe 4, we had peace. No infected, no strange radio broadcasts, just the whisper of wind through trees and the distant echo of our own voices. The first morning that passed without a single sighting almost made us believe that maybe the swarm had moved east or collapsed without hosts, that maybe the virus, or whatever this was, had burned through its fuel. But then, on the 4th night, Nora began screaming. Lisa was the first to reach the tent. The girl was curled in her blanket, pointing at the edge of the clearing. Eric stumbled out behind her, clutching a flashlight and an old hunting knife. His knuckles were white. "There was a man," Nora said. "Not a dead one, a man, watching from the trees." We swept the perimeter. No signs of prints, no broken branches, no disturbances. But Lisa believed her. She always did with children. That same night, a motion chime went off, one quick ring, then silence. Thomas and I responded first, sweeping the north tree line. The wind was sharp, branches still, nothing moved. But near one of the tripwires we found a torn strip of cloth, grey, coarse, recently snagged, not rotted like everything else out here. Whoever watched us wasn't infected, not yet. The next morning we held a meeting. Options were running thin, stay and risk being surrounded again, or break west toward higher ground and thinner forest. Eric suggested we try the Appalachian outposts, places where ranger cabins still held supplies and some comms gear. It was a risk, but not a blind one, and better than waiting for the next breach. We spent the rest of the day loading the engines, but by late afternoon the sky began to change. It was subtle at first, a grey hue deepening at the edges of the horizon, but by 1700 hours the clouds had thickened unnaturally, too uniform, too fast. Static clung to the air. Our handheld radios buzzed even when powered down. Lisa turned on the emergency scanner. For 5 minutes we picked up nothing but random modulated tones, like a corrupted digital signal trying to form speech. And then a single voice came through. "Command terminated. Operation Silent Veil failed. Hostile vectors no longer contained. Civilians advised to avoid central zones. Repeat, total failure. Seek elevation. Do not transmit." Then silence. Martinez turned the scanner off and threw it across the concrete. Enough signals. Enough damn ghosts. We hunkered down that night. Full lockdown. We expected an assault, something loud, something final, but nothing came. Instead, what we found the next morning were the birds, all dead, scattered across the clearing, starlings, crows, even a hawk. No wounds, no blood, just collapsed mid-flight. DeMarco said it was radiation. Thomas said sonic disruption. Lisa, in the calmest voice I'd heard yet, said it was environmental failure, a threshold being crossed. Whatever it was, it told us we couldn't stay. We broke camp that afternoon. We left Post Echo with no markers, no trail, no fire. We took only what we could carry and moved west through the narrow service trail behind the ranger shed. Jenkins carried Nora. Eric held the pack with the last of our fuel. I led the line. Lisa covered the rear. By sundown, we reached a ridge with a view that stretched all the way back to the river basin. In the distance, we could see Trenton, now only a smear of smoke and dying firelight. The roads in and out glinted with the reflection of something, maybe metal, maybe bone. It was hard to say. That night, we found shelter in an old maintenance depot carved into the hill. Dry, cold, empty. And as I write this, pen, paper, old flashlight between my knees, I know this might be the last page. Not because I'm giving up, but because this isn't a story with an ending. A log of one station, one team, one series of choices made under the kind of pressure no training ever prepares you for. We were firefighters, responders. We didn't sign up to survive. We signed up to protect. But now, all that's left is the watching, the warning. They are not mindless, and they will wait longer than you, longer than fire, longer than hope. We are still moving, still breathing, but the station is gone, and the fire is out. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.